Hello and welcome to Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots.
My name is Erika, and I like to watch horror movies.
My name is Katy, and I like to overanalyze things.
Katy, what are we overanalyzing today?
Today, we are going to be taking a deep dive into 1942's Cat People.
Very exciting.
Yes. One of several Val Lewton-produced low-budget horror films.
For RKO. Yes, produced by Val Lewton. He also wrote the short story it's based off of in 1930.
Yeah, it sounds like from what I saw, the script was sort of a combination of him and some other people, and the credited writer, DeWitt Bodine.
Okay, yeah. And then the director is some French guy. Jacques Tourneur is how I'm going to do my personal best. Honestly, I think we are in for some creative pronunciations.
Yeah.
So let's just get into it.
Yeah.
Speaking of, do we just want to immediately decide how we're going to pronounce
Irena.
So our main character, I think honestly when I saw her name for the first time, I thought Irina.
Right, yeah.
Because I saw Irene, but with an A at the end. So it's like Irina.
Yeah, and that is a name I've heard before.
And then Oliver
pronounces it a few ways.
Pronounces it a few different ways. And you actually did look up how the
modern day Serbians on, Reddit and other social medias explaining how they pronounce their names.
Right.
We're like Irena with a hard R, whatever that means.
Irena. Okay. Yeah.
Irena.
So we're gonna do our personal best.
Yeah.
Unlike
Oliver.
Unlike Oliver. Oh, good. Well, honestly, we're not gonna start with Irena. We're gonna start with Oliver today.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I think it's kind of a thing we usually do with this is the 7th episode of our podcast, where we kind of start by talking about the characters,
Yeah.
And that's really nice because I find this movie to be so character driven.
Yes.
Which is nice because we've done some movies where it hasn't been particularly
character driven.
What are
those?
I'm thinking Evil Dead.
Yeah.
Specifically. Very plot driven in that movie.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but
the plot for this one basically boils down to newlyweds have a hard time consummating their marriage because the wife thinks that she's an evil werecat, and you know what? She's right.
And she's right. Yep. This is why we need to trust women.
Oliver.
So,
Ollie.
So let's just jump into it. Initial thoughts about Oliver.
My main feeling towards him is that continuing to insist that her story from her homeland
Irena's
is just some dumb fairy tale that she needs to get over.
Yeah.
It's just rude. And also just not helpful to the situation.
Right, yes.
It's just
yes. And I think I think this is exactly where I want to go when we talk more about Dr. Judd and psychoanalysis. It's this is not helpful, though.
Yes.
We can talk about how, it's happening in your mind or, something is impacting your soul, but, we're not actually fixing it. And I think Oliver is definitely in on that as well.
Yeah. My thing with Oliver, too, is that I feel like he's really, a representation, a good figure for the West and the West's understanding of itself versus the more mystical East.
Yes,
with all of its folk tales and what he's very
he refers to himself as Americano.
Yes. What's more normal than marrying me?
Yes,
because I am Americano.
Yes, and twice in the film he orders apple pie. Okay, we get it.
Okay, you're American.
We get it, Oliver. Yes. He seems to have a sort of well-respected job that is very much white collar. He doesn't really work with his hands.
He works with his mind.
What would you say he does? He's kind of a draft person.
Yeah, he's an engineer for, it looked like submarines or boats.
Boats, I think.
Military vessels.
Yeah. And honestly, this movie comes out in 1942. So U.S. involvement in World War II hasn't quite ramped up yet. So I bet Oliver in a couple years after when this film takes place is making bank.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Him and Alice just got their own little draft person firm doing all kinds of stuff for the US Navy or something. Mm-hmm. So he's very successful, right? He makes it very clear that life is easy for him. Mm-hmm. I don't really know to what extent he really tries to like develop a happy relationship with Irena.
Yeah. He says there's nothing he wants more than for her to be happy, and then like does nothing.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like, well, I want you to be happy, so like just be happy.
Yeah.
It's
like
will
it's hard. Just do it.
And so I think it's probably about halfway through the film when he's talking with his coworker and capital O, capital W, other woman, Alice, where he's having a hard time and he doesn't know how to have a hard time. He says, you know, it's a funny thing. I've never been unhappy before. Things have always gone swell for me. I had a grand time as a kid, lots of fun at school, here at the office with you and the Commodore and Doc. That's why I don't know what to do about all this. I've never been unhappy. And it's like, okay,
white boy,
good for you.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the really interesting things, because I think Oliver definitely represents like the West, right? And like America. And in some ways, Irena represents kind of the East, you know, or like an immigrant experience. And, you know, what I get out of Irena is that like Oliver doesn't know how to be unhappy, and Irena doesn't know how to be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like actually kind of afraid of being happy.
Yes, that she's afraid something bad will happen, right? So neither of them are really set up for success in regards to a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
We know that like they can't, or rather that because of Irena's fear, that they never consummate their marriage.
They don't even kiss.
Right? So like kind of regardless of like the sex aspect of their relationship, like, neither of them really know how to feel their feelings. They're bad at it. They're both bad at it, and they're bad at it in opposite ways.
Yeah.
Which means, like, this relationship is not set up for success.
No.
It's really interesting because I see, when at the very beginning of the film, I think it's quite literally the opening scene, Irena is
sketching
in front of the panther in the zoo. And she litters. How dare she?
Well, she was trying to throw it out, but she's a girl, so she can't quite reach the garbage can with her throw.
I think if she stuffed the sheet into more of a ball, like it would have less surface area and catch less wind and maybe make it. But he helps her out. And it's just like, to me, it's pretty obvious that she says so herself. Like, she lives by herself. She doesn't have a lot of friends, And it's just like obvious that she needs a friend.
Yeah.
Because she sees Oliver as somebody she can get along with and like could be a friend. But Oliver just like has no interest in like a non-romantic, non-sexual relationship with a woman. So he's just like, I met you at the zoo. And then what feels like, and this is actually something I really like about this film, which, by the way, I loved this movie.
Yeah, we haven't said that yet. This is a great film.
Yeah, we watched it.
There's a reason it's a classic.
We watched it together, and like we had to stop ourselves from talking about it. It's like, save it for the podcast. Save it for when we're recording. Because like something that I really like about this movie is that like their use of like time lapses are really like perplexing. Like you don't really know like how much time has passed between this scene, because like the way it seems is like Oliver and Irena met like one day, and literally within a week, if not a couple of days later, he buys her a kitten.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you doing, Oliver?
Yeah. Well,
first of all,
buddy,
don't buy someone.
That's a responsibility that like you don't know if she can handle.
Yeah,
or,
don't do that. Or wants. Yeah. He's never taking into account what Irena wants and needs, because he's a charming mid-century white American man.
It's only ever mattered what he wants and needs.
Yeah, and everything's worked out when he gets what he wants. So like, why would it matter? So I don't really understand. Do you have any idea like how much time has passed between when they meet and when Oliver tries to give Irena a kitten?
I don't know. It is unclear.
And
then even
quick.
The time then until they're getting married, I feel like at some point they say something about like months or something.
Right. So because Irena finds herself kind of like attracted to the panther cage at the zoo, and like we see her there several times throughout the film.
Right, yeah.
And then there's like the zookeeper guy who's in charge of the big cats, and he's like, oh, I haven't seen you around, because like he recognizes her because she's around a lot, right? And she was like, I've been married about a month now. So like we know, okay, so about a month has passed between
but it all is kind of unclear.
Yeah.
And very quick. feeling.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, also, the film is like, what, 75 minutes long?
Yes, keep it short. Keep it going. That's what I like in a movie.
Val Lewton, DeWitt Bodine, Jacques Turner, like, where are they? Like, we need some, like, notes on how to keep a movie really good and engaging
and tight.
And less than 90 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. That is what I'm asking for.
Living in the era of Marvel films, it's like, oh gosh, every movie is so long.
Yeah, no, they're too long.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
What do you think about Oliver's insistence on keeping that kitten in a box for an entire day? Because he goes about his day with this kitten in a box. And there's holes in the box so the cat can breathe.
Yeah.
But, like, the cat, because it's a cat, is like, I don't really want to be in this box. So I'm going to try and get out of it. And he's like, oh, you silly kitten, like, plays with it for a little bit. And, like, okay, back in the box. Yeah. It's like, you're going about your work day. You just expect this cat to just sit in a box? Like, I don't know. What do you think's up with that?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a metaphor to be made in there.
1,000%, yeah.
But also, I feel like our treatment of animals now is different than it was in the past. True. I feel like the idea of keeping an animal in a smaller cage or box for a long period of time would not be weird.
Right. I think that's a really good thing to be keeping in mind for everything about this movie. It's like, it was 1942.
Yeah.
And in some ways, 1942 was a really long time ago, and in some ways it really wasn't.
Yeah.
You know? So, like, I don't know, it's the 40s. Like, we see that scene in the pet shop where there's, like, monkeys.
Yeah.
You know? And you're like, who's buying a monkey in New York City in 1942? Apparently people are.
Right, yeah. Right?
So, yeah, you kind of got to keep
And also, like, the pens that the animals at the zoo are kept in.
Oh my gosh, those are way too small.
Way too small and don't have anything in them. They're just like little square boxes.
And then you see the panther and what's the other big cat right next to it?
It's like a leopard.
A leopard or something, yeah. And like they're just pacing.
Yeah, because they're bored as fuck and they're stressed out.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, these poor cats. You know? Which I wonder if we are meant to feel as a 1942 audience.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I mean, it's the same thing as the cat in the box.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing as Irena. Sort of trying to go through life constrained as she feels.
Yeah. Trying to fit in a specific box.
Yeah, trying to be this, like, American wife that she's not.
So I guess here's what I was thinking, because I pretty much agree with you. He's like, is he trying to contain and control the freedom of this kitten? Does this kitten represent Irena specifically or women more generally?
Yeah, because I also do think it's interesting that Alice specifically really loves cats and gets along with cats very well. So, like, there is this connection to women and cats in general beyond Irena. And there's also the sense of Ollie only being able to relate to women when they're sort of meeting him where he is rather than meeting them where they are.
Right.
He has an easy time with Alice because Alice is what he expects her to be.
Right. And like,
and he had these expectations for Irena.
Yeah.
And she is not living up to them.
Right. Despite her best efforts.
Yeah.
I might say. So Ollie sucks.
Yeah. And I do actually also want to touch on like Ollie as like somebody from the West and of the West is sort of approaching this fairy tale, I guess is what he sees it as, that Irena tells him from this very Western perspective. Because he hears about the story she has where her village was, beset upon by some people called the Mamelukes, and they brought all the people of the village away from Christianity and towards devil worship.
Yes.
But it's okay, because King John I of Serbia, it's important, this is a King John of Serbia, comes in and takes care of the Mamelukes and gets them all back into being good Christians, but the wisest and the wickedest,
and the most wicked, yes,
avoid King John and go into the mountains.
Yes.
And these people are cat people, and they haunt the village. Yes. And if any woman falls in love and kisses the person that she loves, she's gonna like turn into a cat and kill that person.
She will become overwhelmed by her passions.
Yes.
Yes.
So Ollie is looking at this with a very Western perspective and being like, well, that's obviously not a true story.
Yeah.
So this must be some sort of like psychosis. he's like, we need to deal with this in an intelligent way, he says.
Right, yes.
Before he suggests going to a psychiatrist, who we are going to talk about because... But, like, yeah, he's very much not going towards, like, okay, well, how we solved this last time was King John and, like, a flaming sword. He's like, no, that's not what we do in America.
Right.
In America, we go to the worst psychiatrist you have ever heard of.
Because it is the 40s.
Yes.
Yes.
But I find it really interesting because, like, after her first visit with the psychiatrist, that's when Irena starts wearing that black fur coat. That's when she actually starts to get closer to looking like that.
Being a cat.
Yeah, and looking like that Serbian woman that she saw in the restaurant who called her Moja sestra.
Yes. Now, did you know, fun little fact, so that actress is uncredited.
Oh, Moja sestra?
Yeah. Her name's Elizabeth Russell. She's the Serbian woman in the restaurant.
Yeah.
She's uncredited. However, that's not her voice. That's Simone's voice, which is the actress who plays Irena. So, okay, Ollie represents the West.
Yeah. And just though that everything he does to try to, when he is trying to help her, everything he does in this very, like, West way is actually what ends up pushing her further onto this path of becoming Catwoman. It has, like, the opposite effect of what he's going for, because what he never actually does is just listen to what she's saying and, like, take her seriously, like, right from where she is. Like, later he even says that she doesn't want help and, like, accuses her of lying, when it's like, nobody. Irena has been extremely straightforward.
Yeah.
She has told you exactly what is going on with her.
Yeah.
And you've been like, well, that's bullshit. That's stupid. So obviously it's not that. And it's like, I don't know.
And
maybe it is.
He also gets the advice to call Dr. Judd from Alice. And Irena is upset about that.
Yeah.
And, like, I can see why, you know?
Right.
And I think she communicates very clearly. She's like, I don't think Alice has a place in our business, you know? And I was like, yeah, okay, that's fair.
No,
you know?
yeah. And the part that really kills me is the part where it's in, like, the diner or whatever, and Alice, Ollie, and Dr. Judd, a medical professional, are all sitting together deciding Irena's fate, discussing her mental health without her, like, behind her back.
I wrote in my notes while we were watching the film, oh no, men are making decisions about women without the women's input.
Yeah, no, and that was, like, the worst. Oh my God. And it's like,
and then
they're talking about either putting her in asylum or, like, having the marriage annulled or figuring out a divorce. And it's like, what?
Yes. I wrote, women have so little power in this society that it's no wonder that Irena is living with, like, the fear of her quote unquote passions.
Yeah.
Being overrun and, like, overwhelmed by them, because she could be committed for the rest of her life just because of what her doctor and husband say.
Yeah.
Like, ugh. You know?
No, and it's the fact that, like, Ollie.
Fuck that.
Like, the only thing that kind of really stops Ollie from, like, I don't know, having her labeled as a crazy person is that, like, the law says you can't divorce a crazy person.
An insane person. Yeah.
And then, he says that.
Which, is that true?
I don't know.
Maybe it was in 1942 in the state of New York. Yeah, I don't know.
He also says that taking care of her is, quote unquote, the right thing to do.
The Christian thing.
But, like, does she want that? Like, have you asked her?
Yeah.
Have like. Also, this is after Alice has started to believe about the cat stuff.
Alice does start to come around.
But she doesn't say anything in this thing about, like, well, actually, Irena is right. She is having this problem that we need to maybe approach in a different way.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we could help her. Like, it's not delusional. But, like, I'm wondering if she's not saying anything because it's like she's literally listening to these two men talk about how they're going to lock her up in an asylum for having these delusions.
Yeah.
So, like, what are you going to do as Alice? Be like, oh, yeah, I have those delusions too?
Yeah, I actually believe her. Yeah.
Like, yeah,
No.
God, that part is so hard.
Yeah, that's rough. Yeah, and it's, again, like, that's a perfect example of the, like, watching this movie from 1942 in 2023.
Yeah.
It's just like, ooh, no, we don't do it like that anymore, you guys. You know?
Ooh. Yeah. I mean, yeah, Ollie in general, when he starts getting out of that thing of, like, you know, we got to get a divorce. And he's like, you know, it's better this way.
Oh, I think he says something like, I'll give you a divorce.
Yeah.
Like, he's doing her a favor.
Yeah, he's like, it's better this way. I'll give you a divorce. And she's like, better for whom, bitch?
Right, yeah.
Like, what? And I'm just...
Because at that point, we already know that, like, Alice has professed her love for Oliver. And, like, they know that, like, we as the audience understand that, like, that's something else that's happening.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not a divorce It's not for her.
No.
Not really.
It's not in any way
Nothing
for her.
is. Yeah.
It's just that Ollie was done with her the moment that she started being difficult.
Yeah.
And starting having her own ideas about what their relationship together. Like, I'm sorry, but if my girl just couldn't deal with kissing me, I'd be like, okay. Let's talk about this.
Yeah,
Let me not try to change you or discredit your very true fears.
Like, let's figure this out together.
Let's not try to make you feel like you're evil, because I don't think you're evil.
Yeah, and
you have a boundary, and I'm respecting that.
And we're gonna, we can work through it together, and it can take as long as it needs to take.
And if it turns out that this is irreconcilable, we're going to reach that decision together as well.
But see, also, here's the thing, is that, again, 1942, people are just getting married, right? I don't actually think, because, the movie makes it seem like, whoa, they did not know each other very long before they got married. And, maybe they didn't. That wasn't always the case. People got married really fast, you know? Especially with, the expectation of, not having sex until you're married.
Yeah, which...
And people have sexual desires in and out of wedlock. So, they'll be like, okay, let's get married so we can have sex, you know?
And it's very possible that he thought that her fears about kissing him would be over once they got married.
Right, that maybe that was part of it. It's just we're not.
Yeah, I do think as
living in sin, as we might say.
As another symbol of the West, something else that I find interesting about Ollie is that he doesn't actually seem that religious.
No,
that doesn't come across in any particular way, except for when the panther attacks Ollie and Alice.
The T-square.
He holds up a T-square like a wooden cross.
Yeah, it looks like a cross.
Which is such a good moment for him being finally turning to. Okay, Western logic isn't working against this Eastern folklore stuff.
Yeah.
But what about Western religion? What about that King John the First shit?
Yeah.
He's finally meeting her on that level, which is interesting.
What to me makes that particular scene so powerful, and what makes all of these this movie so powerful in its imagery, is because it is in black and white, and just the work that the lighting does and the shadow casting, because this is also considered a well understood movie to kind of be pre-noir. There's there's
a lot of film noir stuff
going on, including darkness and shadow, and a lot of the lighting happening from the floor and going up rather than at the top and coming down we would be more used to, so it's a little bit disorienting. And really it's the shadow of the T-square that really brings the cross imagery there, and it's
so
okay.
Good. It's so good.
Yeah, what about a good old-fashioned cross? What about Christianity? Yeah. But it's interesting because Irena is Christian, or we don't really know.
Religion doesn't actually come up a lot in this.
No, which is interesting because it's incredibly important to the history of Serbia, which we'll get into.
And to the myth that she has, because supposedly they're evil because they were, pushed away from Christianity.
Yes.
And King John brought them back into the flock.
Yeah.
My final note on Ollie, which I just feel like is very Ollie.
Yeah.
Is that, so he finally sees the dead panther body of his wife. Just a dead panther with a sword through it.
Wait, hold up now. No, that's not Irena, though. There's
the panther that he runs over.
Yes.
That's from the zoo. And then there's the other panther that they find with the sword through it. Two separate panthers.
Okay.
She's the one who had a sword through her. Now there's a dead panther with a sword through it.
She did have a sword through her. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. From Dr. Judd, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ollie's
But don't worry, Dr. Judd got his.
Oh, Dr. Judd
I can't wait to talk about it.
His.
Yeah.
But no, Ollie's response to that whole thing is just, oh, she never lied to us. Your wife is fucking dead and also a panther. And he's just the most oh, she never lied to us.
I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Motherfucker.
It took you 70 minutes.
Yeah. To figure out. It took her dying to figure out, she was right. You could have just listened to her the whole fucking time.
So I'm not trying to, make excuses for Oliver, whatever. But I did find it really interesting, and I wonder, which character's idea it was, because we don't see their wedding, but we see their, wedding dinner, right?
Yeah, their little party
and
after.
they go to a Serbian restaurant. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't Irena's idea.
It was Alice's idea.
It was Alice's idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, because Irena tells Alice, she's like, I didn't know there was a Serbian restaurant in town. I was like, you didn't know there was a Serbian restaurant in town? A Serbian immigrant with, no friends or...
Well, because she's trying to hide from her culture. She doesn't want anything to do with Serbia.
Yeah,
because she's afraid of the myth.
I do also wonder something about Irena is, how much of her internal feelings of feeling evil and bad are informed by her being an immigrant.
Yeah.
cat person or not cat person.
Yeah.
Like, how much of it is just like you're from Serbia, kind of in the middle of Europe fighting World War II, you know? So, yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And I was like, wow, they all, like, agreed to go to a Serbian restaurant. Like, that's kind of cool.
That is kind of cool.
Because, like, how else would you incorporate the woman who, quote unquote, looks like a cat? And I had the question, how does one look like a cat? Because she didn't have, like, the cat eyeliner.
No, she had that little black bow in her hair that made her look like she had little cat hair.
Yeah, she had,
and
like,
she was wearing a black fur.
The buns that looked like cat ears, maybe.
She was wearing her black fur coat.
Okay.
And all in black.
Okay.
And she just had a very feline-esque face, obviously.
Okay.
Apparently, the reason why they wanted to cast Simone Simon is that they didn't want somebody who looked too, like, adult feline sexy cat. They wanted somebody who looked like a cute little kitten.
A kitten, yeah.
They wanted it to be surprising that she was like, the evil of the film. Because she's so cute and tiny.
She
and look at her little
cute,
face.
Yeah.
Look at her little round face.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think about that when we think about, like, the movie's called Cat People, right? And she's concerned about, like, her her passions being aroused and turning into a big cat and maybe killing somebody, right?
Yeah.
But she also has, like, a lot of cat, like, house cat imagery in her home.
Yeah.
And then the cat doesn't like her, like the cat, little, it looked like a little Siamese or something. I don't know. The kind of cat that Oliver gets for her, again, without her input.
Yeah.
Is, like, not into Irena, and she even says, like, yeah, cats don't really like me, and like, and so when she goes into the pet store, like, all of the animals react to her, and so, like, what are the kind of animals we see? We see kittens, right? Like smaller house cats, monkeys for whatever reason,
lots of birds,
and birds, right? And so I'm just kind of thinking about those as, like, prey animals for bigger cats, right? Like, especially in, like, a jungle setting. Where there are big cats and monkeys, like, monkeys could be prey for a big cat, maybe. Birds, absolutely. And, like, that's the weird thing about house cats, I say with one sitting on my lap right this moment, is that, like, they are such an interesting combination of predator and prey.
Yeah.
Especially, like, a tiny, like, a kitten, right? Like, it's super vulnerable and could be prey to, like, a bird of prey.
Yeah.
A bigger cat.
All sorts of things,
right? And so it's interesting that, like, Irena is coming off as, like, a little kitten with her cute little round face and, and her nails making scratchy things, a couple of times.
Just playing with that bird.
Until it dies of fright.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of interesting, like, how she embodies both, like, domesticated cat traits and, like, wild cat traits.
Should we move on to Dr. Judd, the worst man in the entire world?
Yes, let's talk about Dr. Judd. So, Dr. Louis Judd, he is our psychiatrist?
Psychoanalyst, whatever we want to say.
Psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
Who apparently Alice knew. He's our, what does Oliver say? Like, let's deal with this in an intelligent way. So, like, he's our intelligent solution. Yeah. And what are, like, some of the things he gets up to in this movie?
Oh my god. Okay, so he's
other than discussing institutionalizing Irena without Irena being there. Yeah.
Okay. So, like, my first, I guess, red flag for him. Is he's the first person to find out that Irena has this history where her dad, like, died mysteriously in the forest.
Yes.
And her mother got the blame for that, and people in the village started calling her a witch and a catwoman. So, like, that makes her fear really reasonable.
Yeah. Really
if it's coming from this place of, like, oh, my mom and my dad were in love. My dad died, and supposedly my mom was responsible for it.
Yeah, and, like, she took the blame for that, and nothing was ever the same
and
after.
And it seems like he's going to start being like, okay, so a lot of these fears are rooted in, like, something from childhood. Let's get into that.
Classic psychoanalysis, by the way.
But then, like, he doesn't really... It never comes up again. He then just goes straight back to, like... Okay, so now these are just fairy tales and you shouldn't be afraid of them anymore. Okay, and done.
Yeah. And it's like, no, not done.
Yeah. I think a problem with Dr. Judd in treating Irena is that he does have this he has his way that he is going to solve this problem. And he doesn't really look at what she is bringing to the table herself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she has this really great line when she's talking to him about how, like, she didn't want to go back and see him again because whenever he spoke of the soul, he meant the mind.
Right.
And that those are, like, separate things to her.
And then he, like,
in her
patronizes
culture.
her and says, like, oh, you're very clever understanding the difference between the mind and the soul. I was like, okay, so then, like, help her then?
I know,
or
yeah.
No? Okay.
Yeah, it just seemed like another one of those instances of like him being like, okay, here I am, my like white Western man guy who's Americano and gonna be like, this is all in the mind. We're gonna solve it the intelligent way. And she's like, actually, there's something deeper and darker happening here that I would like to address, and you are refusing to address it with me. Like, there are actual really real emotions that we need to talk about, and we can't just keep this all in the like intelligence sphere. Right. It's not just the mind.
And also it is informed by something much larger socially and culturally.
Yeah.
Rather than like internally.
Yeah.
There's much more external force that's happening. Yeah.
Which I do think then I do find it interesting that Alice is the first person to believe Irina's story. Just in the sense of like women seeing each other in a way that men can't. And like all those ideas about like the feminine being sort of like the archetype of the feminine being closer to like the darker and the earthy and the supernatural, the mystical.
Yeah.
And like Alice being able to see that, and the psychiatrist whose job it is to like help her cannot see that. And it's just like, actually, you're just both hysterical and have overactive imaginations. And like laughs at the idea of like, oh, I'll get my silver bullets. Ha 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 ha.
Right. And then he does reveal that he has a sword in his walking stick, cane, whatever. And, honestly, I think my favorite part is when Irina totally mauls Dr. Judd to death.
Oh my God.
It was so great.
Oh my God, it's so good.
Yeah, because
I literally wrote, I have never been more happy than when Irina turned into a panther and ate the psychiatrist.
But because what makes it all the more satisfying is because right before that, because Dr. Judd, first of all, kisses Irina without her consent.
Yeah.
And tells Irina not to be afraid of him.
Yeah.
Because, like, he cannot fathom a reality in which she is the danger to him.
Yeah.
Not the other way around.
Yeah.
And then she totally mauls him to death.
Yes.
So good.
Oh my God. The way he totally misunderstands her.
Yeah.
Because he does that the first time he is sort of like teasing her about the myth and is like, well, what would happen if I were to kiss you?
Yeah.
And she's like, I only know I should not like to be kissed by you. And it's like, okay, then stop the conversation there.
Yeah.
But like, no,
again,
he doesn't.
Irina's really good at like communicating her feelings and setting her boundaries.
Yes, nobody listens. And instead, he says that like she's enjoying their game. They're like, this contest of wills we're having. And she's like, I'm not having a contest of wills.
Possibly a game of cat and mouse.
Yeah.
In where he's the cat, maybe? I don't know.
Like, yeah. And then it's like, okay. And also, I don't know. He's still the one who can lock her up in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
So, like, he still is absolutely somebody to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Especially when he's leering at her and being like, you interest me.
And he, like, when she makes the one appointment, she shows up. She wasn't super happy with how it went and chooses not to go back. And, you know, she's, again, consistently throughout the film being drawn to the panther cage in the zoo. And Dr. Judd comes and finds her there.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And I was like, don't you have other patients? You're a doctor. You've got to be busy.
He's like obsessed with her in this really gross way. And I hate the thing that he says to her. I wrote it down because I hated it.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm curious if this came up in like your psychoanalysis research, if this is a thing. Because he said that he kind of expected her to keep the key. Because there is, in some cases, a psychic need to loose evil upon the world, and we all of us carry within us a desire for death. You fear the panther, yet you're drawn to him again and again.
Yes.
Couldn't you turn to him as an instrument of death? And it's like, was she thinking any of that? She literally saw the key and like returned it, like,
and then she returned it, and then after he puts that idea in her head, when she sees the key again, she keeps it. Yeah, like we don't.
Dr. Judd, you're wrong, and you're being about him. Like, that's why I say everything that they do in their like Western perspective or whatever, actually pushes her more to that sort of like Eastern folklore mythology, like cat people thing. Like that's what makes her really go into it.
Yeah,
it's everything they do to try to help her makes it worse.
Maybe I should free this panther.
Yeah,
right. And also I think to me the panther, especially that panther in the cage in the Central Park Zoo, like is a symbol of sexuality, like just sexuality in general, not like queer sexuality, just like sexuality.
Yeah.
And like it is something that a lot of people kind of have a fear of, but come to it again and again because human beings have sexuality.
Yeah.
Right. So like we might be fear it maybe because we're taught to, or we have some like
purity culture stuff.
Yeah. Right. Maybe some misunderstandings about sexuality in general.
Maybe
but
we have
like
some traumas related to it.
Yeah, exactly. But like we find ourselves coming to it again and again because that's just like what humans do.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say it, you know. So to me, that panther, especially the panther in the cage in the Central Park Zoo, represents sexuality.
Well, perhaps if you had spoken to Irena instead of Dr. Judd, things would have gone differently.
Dude, Irena and I would be best friends.
Yeah.
I would love to.
I think she's great.
I would love to hear all about King John.
Yeah.
Like, tell me everything, you know?
Yeah.
Let's go see the cats. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know?
We're going to draw pictures of the panthers. I am there.
Yeah.
I will draw all the pictures of panthers.
Because, like, she's just kind of sketching in that first scene. She's just sketching.
She's a working girl. She has a job.
She does,
yes. As, like, a designer.
Yeah. So, and then, like, you know, she kind of throws it away and, like, she doesn't let Oliver see it, but the audience gets to see it later. And we see, like, a panther with, like, a knife.
Yeah,
or a sword through it. And it
it
was like foreshadowing. But like, you know, it's like you were just sketching for like 30 seconds and that's what you made. Like, you go, Irena.
Yeah. God, you're a bad bitch.
She's got skills. Yeah. She's a working girl. She's busy.
But what I want you to tell me about is psychoanalysis.
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 Yes. So I went through a really, really big phase for like kind of most of high school of being super into Sigmund Freud.
Yeah.
You might remember. And so I like to consider myself pretty familiar with psychoanalysis. And I do consider myself a fan of Sigmund Freud. I totally understand that there are valid critiques of Freud and psychoanalysis, and that's fine.
Yes. Just because a lot of the things he said are super, super duper wrong doesn't mean it's not interesting.
Yes, or exactly. So, in the 1940s, therapy in general, specifically psychoanalytical therapy, is really, really popular. I think it's worth noting that Sigmund Freud dies in 1939.
Oh, okay.
So Sigmund Freud has passed by this point.
Yeah.
But his ideas are just catching like wildfire, right? So psychoanalysis is a set of theories and therapeutic techniques. I got this right off of Wikipedia, by the way.
Dude, I'm going to throw out some Wikipedia
I
later,
love this friend.
So.
That deal in part with the unconscious mind, which together form a method of treatment for mental disorders.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the main thing. So Freud's main idea, because like, you know, he doesn't come up with psychoanalysis in a vacuum, right? There are other people who are kind of helping him create these ideas, but you know, he gets a lot of the
same time.
Yeah, he gets a lot of the
renown.
There you go. Yeah. Freud distinguishes between the conscious and unconscious mind, arguing that the unconscious mind is what largely determines our behavior and our cognitions, like our thought processes, owing to those unconscious drives. So Freud observed that attempts to bring such drives into awareness, right, like to move our drives that determine our behavior and our cognition from the unconscious to the conscious, right, often triggers some resistance or like defense mechanisms, particularly repression, like memory repression. And I know that there's like, at least it's my understanding that there's like quite a bit on either side of it.
Yeah. I've mostly heard stuff on like, it's not
really a thing. So we have this conflict between the conscious and the unconscious, right? That can result in, you know, according to Freud and other early psychoanalysis, mental disturbances, right?
Yeah,
like anxiety, depression, delusions, maybe, you know. Freud also postulates that unconscious material can be found in dreams, right? And unintentional acts, right? Including mannerisms and a good old-fashioned Freudian slip.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You said one thing, but you meant another, you know. Psychoanalytic therapy developed as a means to improve mental health by bringing unconscious material into consciousness, you know? Psychoanalysis placed a large emphasis on early childhood in a person's individual development.
Just like we saw.
Like we see, yeah. So, also, we do see Irena going through some analytical therapy in her first appointment with Dr. Judd, and that's like pretty straightforward because she's lying down, right? So that's pretty, textbook psychoanalysis, is that the patient would lie down and the doctor would somehow be kind of like out of sight. So he's kind of over her, but he's shining a very bright light in Irena's face, so like she probably can't see him, So say what you want about Freud and psychoanalysis, and there's a lot of stuff to say, right?
Yeah.
But psychoanalysis, especially in the 40s, kind of is that first step towards our common like talk therapy practices now, like cognitive behavioral therapy and psychotherapy, right? So it's kind of like it's like psychoanalysis walked so cognitive behavioral therapy could run, So however, this isn't to say that there isn't a dark side to psychoanalysis, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
Especially in those really early days of developing this theory, like through in the early 1900s, quite through the 40s, right? Which when this movie is being made.
That's the thing, is that Freud and his theories and other people making these theories were bringing a lot of their own biases from other realms into them. So you get a lot of like sexism, misogyny coming up in these early things.
Yep. And a misunderstanding of sexuality.
Yeah.
Right. Misunderstanding of exactly how trauma impacts our brains.
Yeah.
Like quite physically,
Yeah.
So psychoanalysis is especially in these early days, is not a practice informed by social and cultural pressures, right?
Yeah.
The focus is more on the internal, the self, the conscious versus the unconscious, the ego, superego, id, all that fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
But there's not a lot of room for understanding of the external forces.
Yeah.
Enter Dr. Judd. Dr. Judd and Oliver are telling Irena, and Alice to a smaller extent, or like telling Irena, like, that's a very silly fairy tale, like one day you'll have kids and they'll enjoy hearing that story from you, but like it's not real, right? And it's like, but you have to understand, like, to her it is. Like she's grown up in this culture, in this, society.
Supposedly these cat people haunted her village.
Yeah,
where her mother was literally accused of being a cat person and a witch.
And her father died. And like it is real. Yeah. And like the way that, like, I don't know, maybe like Santa Claus.
I was gonna say Santa Claus too, actually.
Yeah. So like Santa Claus isn't real, but like for millions of children,
he very much is.
Very much is. And like even as an adult now, the idea of Santa is like, he might as well be real.
Yeah. He's still doing stuff in our culture.
Exactly.
Whether he's real or not, he still has an impact on our culture.
Exactly. So it's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So this is what I would call not trauma informed.
No. I was just going to say also, I think it is cool that Valoon, with his these horror films that he was going to do, he didn't want them to be sort of like schlocky monster stuff. What he really wanted them to be was psychological, really getting into these deep subconscious desires. And he really did draw a lot on psychoanalysis to sort of inform his films.
And I want to talk about the anatomy of atavism.
Oh, yeah, because it's such a weird little quote.
It's weird. So at the very beginning, so even before the zoo scene, we get the opening credits, of course, with backdrops of big jungle cats, right?
Yeah.
And we get a quote. So the quote is, "Even as fog continues to lie in the valleys, so does ancient sin cling to the low places, the depressions of the world consciousness." And that quote is attributed to Dr. Lewis Judd, The Anatomy of Atavism.
Yes.
Now, do you know what an atavism is?
No.
You want to give a guess? I'm going to be honest, I didn't know until I looked it up.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like something like electron-y, like it sounds science-y to me. I have no idea what it is.
It is science-y. It's biology. So an atavism is a modification of a biological structure whereby an ancient genetic trait reappears after having been lost through evolutionary change in previous generations.
Oh.
Yes.
So that's relevant.
It's relevant.
The idea is that there were some cat people back in her lineage.
Yes. And
that
then
haven't
maybe
resurfaced, but now they are resurfacing.
Through her.
Through her genetics.
So
through the lineage. That's cool.
I'm going to read the quote one more time.
Okay.
Even as fog continues to lie in the valleys, so does ancient sin cling to the low places, the depressions in the world consciousness. So, what does that mean?
What you going on about, Dr. Judd?
I have 2 readings.
Okay, cool. I'd love to hear them.
So one is actually not my original thought. I lifted it from an author, M. Keith Booker.
Okay.
Although, like, when I read what it said, I was like, yeah, I totally agree that this could be one way to read this quote. So I'll start with this one, and then I'll give you my own. Just original Erika Peterson right out of the gate.
Original
thoughts, yeah. So even though the epigraph, which I think is what this is called, the quote before, isn't specifically mentioning Serbia, we do kind of see Serbia, at least the film's version of Serbia, kind of seen as one of like the dark places.
Yeah.
Right. And the evocation of like the words ancient sin, you know, and depressions in the world consciousness is like really overt, you know, and seems consistent with what happens throughout the film, you know?
But it's a lot of that sort of like Orientalist language, exoticizing the E's,
absolutely,
sort of like the foreign.
And most importantly, like the legend of the cat people in Irena's village is consistent with a reputation of the Balkan regions, which is where Serbia is, as an area of darkness, as like where East meets West, where Orientalism and maybe non-Christianity might be happening,
paganism,
right?
clashing with the Christianity.
It functions as a believable premise for Western audiences. So I straight up took that from M.
After all, where vampires come from.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So there's that, right? Yeah. But to me, something else is like we could also read it this way, which is probably not the way a character like Dr. Judd meant, but I kind of think it's like, you know, especially like depressions in the world consciousness, like that makes me think of like everyone, not just an individual, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's like we all have a capacity for sin, and we always have, like human beings. It's like in our nature, right? We have a capacity. Every single person has a capacity for sin. We always have, and probably always will.
Yeah.
Right.
Whatever sin means.
Yeah.
I mean.
So every person or the world, you know, no matter how well adjusted they might seem, are still capable of having those quote unquote depressions.
Yeah.
In their consciousness, kind of pulling us down to the unconscious. Right.
Yeah.
So, and then that I think goes really well with kind of your reading of the last thing.
Holy Sonnets 5 by John Donne. Do you want me to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, what can you just read it for us?
I have the whole sonnet.
Great.
Yeah. Gonna get my sonnet voice going.
Okay. You don't have to read the whole sonnet.
No, I'm going to.
Okay, read the whole sonnet.
I am a little world made cunningly of elements and an angelic sprite, but black sin hath betrayed to endless night my world's both parts, and oh, both parts must die. You which beyond that heaven which was most high have found new spheres, and of new lands can write, pour new seas in mine eyes, that so I might drown my world with my weeping earnestly, or wash it, if it must be drowned no more. But oh, it must be burnt. Alas, the fire of lust and envy hath burnt it heretofore, and made it fouler. Let their flames retire, and burn me, O Lord, with a fiery zeal of thee and thy house, which doth in eating heal. Okay, so that's the whole sonnet.
Wow.
So John Donne is coming after Shakespeare. He's taking a little bit from Shakespearean sonnets, but also drawing a lot on like Petrarch and the famous Italian sonnet writers. He's somebody who I know of as having written a lot of sexy, hot sonnets in his youth.
Sexual?
Yeah.
Ooh,
super sexy. Okay. And then later in life, became really religious, and actually near the end of his life, like wanted to like take orders, become some sort of monk or whatever.
Okay.
I don't know how religion works.
Yeah.
Something like that. And so he started to write a lot of holy sonnets, which he used to kind of like repent a lot of his youthful lust. And so this poem is another example of it. And it's an example of he's talking a lot about how he had a lot of lust and envy in his youth, you know. He has a lot of sin within him. But he's specifically talking about it in this way that I think ties with that really nicely, about he is like two pieces of a person. He has, you know, the sort of angelic spirit that, you know, the form that God made him, but he also has within himself this capacity for sin, and that the sin has this way of overtaking all of his angelic self, and thus he needs to destroy both parts of him to get rid of all of that sin. Is sort of what he's getting at. He's actually going straight to like God and is like, I'm crying, I'm repenting, I'm so sad. If you wanted to send a whole flood like you did for Noah to wipe away all the sin, I'd be so down with that. Yeah. Oh, but I just remembered with Noah, after that, you said you were never going to do it. You
promised you wouldn't, yeah.
But you said next time you wanted to get rid of sins, you would burn the world.
Right.
So I'm ready for that. Because there's also this idea in this era of like lust being something that burns you.
Right.
Which actually kind of now is still a thing. Fiery passion.
Right. And I also think about like fire as a cleanser.
Yeah. So he's like, I have this lust burning me. But what I need is your holy fire burning me.
Right.
Yeah. And that's how I'll heal.
That kind of reminds me of the Vavitch.
Yeah.
Where like there is like this kind of weird sexual thing around the family's relationship with God.
Yeah.
You know, sexuality being like associated with sin pretty much as long as we've been thinking about something as sin.
Right.
And like kind of getting those feelings mixed up with like your religious feelings and like, you know, your adoration and devotion to God.
But I also think it's interesting with the psychoanalysis stuff of these like two different parts.
Yes.
This like kind of subconscious that's going to bring down your conscious and like cause problems. That like sort of depression spot, pulling in the sins.
Right. But you know what? When we think about like two parts, like, you know what that makes me think of?
What?
Bisexuality. Because I would argue that humans are more than just two parts. Like, humans contain multitudes. Like,
I mean, well, that's a whole other therapeutic practice.
Yes, this
parts
is true.
work.
Yes, and so when I think about like two parts, right? I think like, oh, the part of you that's straight and the part of you that's not. Which I want to, when we get to the gay stuff.
We'll get to the gay stuff.
So that's just a nice little tee up for the gay stuff.
But yeah, is there anything else we want to say about Dr. Judd and
God,
psychoanalysis? No. Can we just fuck that guy? Is all else I want to say about him.
Yeah, I'm good on Dr. Judd. Should we move to Irena?
Yeah, after all, we're talking about sin and the darkness and Serbia. Yeah. Let's start talking about Irena.
Irena is like a really interesting character. I like her a lot. And it's interesting, like one of the, you know, once she goes to, or she invites Oliver over for tea, right?
Yeah.
You know, and she.
Oh, I love that part. I love that, like, it sort of starts with him kind of being like, what if I wrote you a letter and asked you to tea? Yeah. And she's like, oh, then I'd have to reply, by the way, this is my house. You want to come in and have tea? Yeah. Like, she totally turns it on him and is like, come into my domain. I'm actually in charge of this. I'm going to bring you into my lair.
Yeah. And then what does he say? Is like, oh, you make it so easy. Miss Dubrovna, because like they just met each other, so they're still calling each other Miss and Mrs. Yes. And they talk about how she lives really close to the zoo.
Yeah.
And like
close enough to hear the panthers and the lions.
Or to hear the lions. Yeah. And she's like, I don't mind the lions, but she does say something about not liking the sound of the panther.
Oh yeah.
Because it makes the sound of a woman, or like a woman
wailing
screaming.
Woman, a screaming woman.
And it's like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, all of this, the little subtle cat stuff around her is obviously just great.
And also not subtle.
But also the not subtle. Yeah. Like
she's got paintings on the wall of cats, and she's got her King John the First statue spearing a cat.
It's like clearly a preoccupation on her mind.
Very much, yes.
But then the smaller ways, like the work that her hand does in this movie, every time it becomes a claw, either like reaching towards her desires that she can't have, or like clawing at things she doesn't when she's unhappy. Yes. Like it's all so good.
Yeah, it really is. And I just feel so deeply for this character. Like talking about Oliver earlier and how like he doesn't know how to be unhappy. Yeah. Like I think it's the opposite for Irena. Like she doesn't know how to be happy. Like everything about her identity is like stacked against her success, you know? Yeah. And like one of the other things I really like, one of the like lines that Irena says that I really like is like that once she's married to Oliver and like she says, she's like, I want nothing more than to be Mrs. Reed. Right. And everything that means, you know? And so like, so what does it mean for her to be Mrs. Reed?
Yeah.
You know, what does it mean for her to like stop feeling like an other? You know, like what does it mean to change her name from Dubrovna
to read?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also a good companion to the line that she has when he's talking to her about getting divorced. She sort of sinks down by the couch. This is where the scene happens where she sort of, her claws tear into the couch.
She straight up tears up the couch. Yeah.
But she says, I love silence. I love loneliness.
Yes.
When he's like breaking her heart.
She also says she loves the darkness.
Yeah, that's earlier. Yeah.
What does she say? She like, it feels like a friend or something?
Yeah, she calls it a friend.
Wow, yeah.
But this one, she's like clearly upset. And she's clearly like, in this very sad way, saying, I love silence and I love loneliness.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like the safety that she has in like not being perceived. In the safety in like not feeling the good emotions, because that means you'll never feel enough to feel the bad emotions either.
And her like safety in isolation.
Yeah, her safety
not
in
unlike
isolation.
a big cat.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And gay people, but we'll get to that later.
We'll get to it later. Yeah. Well, and Jews for that matter, honestly.
I mean, all that immigrant experience stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it all ties in with her. I also just want to say that her perfume smells not like flowers, but something warm and living, which is just like hot.
I'm just thinking about how cool Irina is.
I know, she's really
she's so cool.
And
yeah, it's like, you know, it really seems like she needs some friends,
Yeah.
you know, and like and that's what she kind of wants Oliver to be. And then she kind of realizes that like that can't happen.
Right, because
So
heterosexism.
she's trying to make herself like, again, like the kitten in the box. Like
Yeah.
she has to fit in this tiny
she's
little
trying to
box.
be in that box.
She has to be Mrs. Reed. She wants to be Mrs. Reed, but she
she's
doesn't know
not.
how. And I was like, but do you really want to be
I
Mrs. Reed,
know.
Irina? Because like this guy sucks. She expresses her like jealous feelings about other women. She like sees other women. She wishes she could be as free as them. You know?
Yeah. I envy every woman I see on the street. They're happy. They make their husbands happy.
Ooh.
They lead normal, happy lives.
Uh-huh.
They're free. Just that longing she has.
And like, does she actually think that that's her key to freedom? Is
Yeah.
like being a happy wife and making sure she has a happy husband?
Right,
Like,
yeah.
is that what freedom is?
Yeah, it's this idea that this like heterosexist state is going to like be what saves her, but it's also the thing that is
Or
going to damn her.
the box she needs to fit into.
Yeah.
And she wants to fit into the box. She doesn't want to be an other, but she doesn't fit in the box. And there's nothing you can do if you don't fit in the box.
Yeah.
So
There's also,
she's
it goes
kinda
with
stuck.
that zookeeper line, the line the zookeeper has where he says no one comes to see the panther when they're happy.
yeah. First of all, disagree.
I know. Love a panther.
Yeah.
Love every big cat at the zoo.
Yeah, right.
Go to the zoo any day of my life. Happy or sad.
So how old do you think Irena is?
Like mid-20s.
Like mid-20s. I definitely think she's older than 20, but I don't think she's any older than 30.
No.
So this movie comes out in 1942. That's when it takes place, right? So that puts Irena's birth somewhere between 1912 and 1922, right? And she speaks with an accent, right? So kind of leads me to believe that she lived in Serbia for a while, like grew up there, like had her adolescence there. And so she would be growing up specifically in the aftermath of the First World War before immigrating alone.
Possibly? I mean, we know that
To
her
the US.
dad is dead and
Right.
her mom was accused of witchcraft, so it's not looking great for mom either.
So before immigrating, probably alone
Yeah.
to the United States. So the history of Serbia is rife with a lot of conflict. Serbia is put under either influence or straight up direct control of a couple different empires for about 500 years. The Ottoman Empire and also the Austro-Hungarian Empire has like a lot of pull in Serbia. It's also worth noting, I'm sure you'll bring it up as well, that Sunni Islam is the official religion of the Ottoman Empire. But of course, you know, the Ottoman Empire exists for about 600 years.
Yeah.
And like it's 600 years worth of history. You know, the people who are living under that empire are probably practicing every religion.
I forgot. I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
If you saw anything and you're looking into the Ottoman Empire, or if you know of any connections between Sunni Muslims or the Ottoman Empire with cats or any sort of cat mythology.
Yeah. So you know that a couple years ago I went to Morocco,
Yeah.
and Morocco I don't think was ever part of the Ottoman Empire, but it's a Muslim majority country, right? And there were cats frickin' everywhere. Lions are a huge symbol of Morocco. There used to be lions in the Atlas Mountains. I think they're since extinct now. But there are cats everywhere, and it was kind of my understanding that like they were very pro cat because cats are, and this is true for like all of Islam, which includes the Islam practiced in the Ottoman Empire, of like cats being, you know, especially domesticated cats being a symbol of cleanliness. They're allowed to enter mosques, right? Because, you know, you're supposed to, kind of
like
clean
bathe
yourself
yourself a little bit,
absolution before you
Yeah.
enter a mosque. So cats are allowed because
How
they're
sweet
clean.
for them.
I know, I love that. So the domestic cats do represent like cleanliness, and like they are a symbol, you know, a positive symbol in Islam, which I think does extend to the Ottoman Empire, right? And also, you know, like I would imagine that they would have sultans as their leaders.
Yes.
So like, yeah, sultans would have big cats, right? You know, I imagine as symbols of power.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
like a cheetah or a
I'm pretty sure they use them for like hunting.
And then again, like it kind of goes back to like the difference between the symbolism of a domesticated cat and the symbolism of like a big cat.
Yeah.
You know? So cats are definitely there.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was just curious. That is going to become relevant later. Continue telling me about Serbia.
Oh, yes, of course. The Serbia.
That was an aside that will come back later.
Thank you. So Serbia is, and I got maps for you because I know you're not a super geo person.
I know, I'm real bad at geography.
So Serbia is under, you know, either direct control or influence of the Ottoman Empire or the Austro-Hungarian Empire for like the better part of 500 years, almost 600. So when this movie is taking place in 1942, Serbia is actually under Axis control.
Okay.
In World War II. I was looking through like a timeline of like the country of Serbia, and like just trust me, it's a mess. Okay?
Yeah.
So
I mean, a lot of those Eastern European countries are a mess because I mean that's where World War I really blew up, and that's just
because it was a Serbian national who assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Right. So post World War II, Serbia becomes part of Yugoslavia, first called the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and then later becomes the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, up until the 1990s when the USSR, the early 90s when the USSR kind of falls apart. So does the country that was called Yugoslavia. And Serbia doesn't become a nation called Serbia again until 2006. So Serbia has a rough history. So I want to show you a map here. Okay. So here is where Yugoslavia was.
Oh, it's big.
For the listener, Yugoslavia included nations that we now call Serbia, that we call Macedonia or North Macedonia, depending on who you are, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, all those places, right, which are just east of Italy, just across the Adriatic there.
Yeah.
And we do see that Serbia is real close to Romania, where vampires are from, famously.
Serbia has its own vampire mythology too.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's super cool. And then really close to what is now Turkey, which is kind of like the mainstay of the Ottoman Empire, right? So and to me, and I think it's maybe because I've just straight up been told this so many times, is like, the country of Turkey kind of acts as that gateway between the East and the West. So, that's Serbia, right?
Yeah.
I'm really interested to know more about the folklore.
Yes.
How they feel about cats.
Yeah. I do want to talk about, so I had to know if panthers existed in Serbia because it seemed unlikely.
It seems unlikely.
And what they have, or at least nowadays, they have Eurasian lynxes.
Oh, I love a
and
lynx.
European wildcats, but no panthers. But I do kind of love the idea of Irena as like an immigrant, not bonding with a cat from her homeland, but instead bringing this connection with this cat who's also stuck in this zoo, also far away from its own home.
Right.
Like, honestly, I think that makes sense as a connection that she would make, even though it's not a cat from her homeland. Yeah. I kind of love that for her. So then my question is, so there is actually in Serbian folklore not a lot about cats.
Okay.
But I did kind of look into general cat mythology stuff. I was curious about some of the like inspirations for the movie, and some that I saw brought up as possible inspirations. There were like a few short stories I guess there was some, higher up guy who was like, we don't got enough going on with cats. There's a real untapped market there with cats. Let's get some cat people, Because, the idea is that this movie started with, they were like, here's your title, cat people.
That's true.
Just make a story.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, let's see what we can find about cat people. So there's the short story by Ambrose Bierce called The Eyes of the Panther.
Ooh.
And it's about a woman who spurns a man's proposal because she believes she's mad. And then she does indeed turn out to be a werepanther.
Okay.
So, obvious connection there.
Yeah.
There's Ancient Sorceries by Algernon Blackwood, which is just about this small town that's overrun with, like, witches and werecats.
Okay.
And then Monsieur Seeks a Wife is another one I saw.
Okay.
By Margaret Irwin, which is the only one that I actually had on hand to read. And I quite liked it. I like her narrative voice. It's pretty good. But it's like this guy who's deciding between these three different sisters, choosing one to get married because their families are going to like combining houses as is done.
Birth order.
You know, and so he's like, the noble thing would be to marry the older sister. And that's kind of what he's going and thinking about.
Because the older one's got to get married first. Probably.
Yeah. And the other two sisters are going to end up in a nunnery. But like he gets there and the vibes are weird. And he does think the oldest sister is the most sensible. But everybody in this like whole village and the whole family has these weird vibes of being like afraid. And there's this white cat, and then there's the youngest sister who's creepy as fuck, and he gets like kind of hypnotized by her eyes and her singing, and she has like these cat eyes. And like in the night he gets stalked by her cat familiar, or at least he thinks he does, and he like stabs out at it with his sword. But then when he finds it the next morning, it hasn't been hurt. But then when he goes to talk to her, she has a little scratch on her. And so like basically it turns out that like she's not exactly a werecat. She's like a witch who has this cat as her familiar and has certain feline qualities to her. So like these are all sort of what DeWitt Bodine and the other writers were drawing on were these stories. But I also just kind of was curious about panther mythology in general. Yeah. And I didn't find a lot in Serbia. Like, there's a lot about, like, wolves. Wolves are a big animal. Yeah. But, like, cats... Though panther, in particular, is an interesting one. Because, going to Greek mythology, the panther is, like, a totemic symbol of Dionysus. You're familiar with Dionysus. He's a god
He likes to party.
Yeah, he likes to party, dude. Yeah. He's a god of, like, the wilds.
Bacchus.
And, yeah. He's the Roman
version. Thank you.
Yeah. He's the god of wine. Yeah. His followers. He has his, women followers who get naked and have wild parties in the woods and then go tear men apart with their bare hands.
Sounds like witches to me.
I mean, yeah. And also the panther as one of its symbol, because pan, meaning pantheon, all, pan. Yeah. Panther comes from like all beast.
Oh.
And so it was this kind of general term for like the bestial, the wild, the untamable. And like with Dionysus being this figure who's like all about unleashing desires and being untamable. Yeah. Like panther is interesting. And it goes into like medieval Europe where they use panther honestly to kind of talk about a lot of different beasts, some of them mystical. Like you see these drawings of panthers and they have like horns or wings or something. And it's like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
Though also you have a panther coming up as a symbol of Christ, which I did not know.
Oh.
There are like medieval drawings of panthers with like rainbow fur. Because, rainbows are also symbols of like Christ.
It's a symbol of the covenant between God and man. Yeah.
So it's like an interesting contrast to what the actual zookeeper says in this movie. Where he says he's likening it to the beast in Revelations.
Yes.
And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard.
Like unto a leopard.
And his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and a seat and his great authority.
And the dragon being Satan.
Yeah.
Do you also just like kind of wish we got to know more about the zookeeper?
I know. What's his story?
What's his story?
Why is he always forgetting his keys?
He's just leaving keys in cages, and he's talking about the animals he's
talking about how panthers
caretaking
are
evil. I'm like, okay. Just spouting revelations. Okay.
There are actually a lot of, because this movie takes place in America.
Sure does.
I was like,
New York.
I can't find Serbian stuff, what about American stuff? And there actually are, cats play a large role in a lot of Native American mythologies.
Yes. Yeah.
Usually as like protectors, hunters, and like healers.
Yeah.
I guess I saw some like Western myths where they were more like bad omens.
Yeah, like a big cat. Fuck you up, man.
Yeah. And in this case, we're talking more like pumas and things like that, you know, rather than specifically a panther, but it's all the same.
Yeah. Big
symbologically.
Cat.
Yeah. I did find one They're myths sort of in Appalachia area.
Appalachia.
It's
okay, it doesn't.
God damn, I can't pronounce words.
It's okay. So here's the thing. I'm not from there, but like it is my understanding that someone from there
says Appalachia
would be upset.
I'm sorry, Appalachians.
So the way I've always heard it is like if you say it, how did you say it? Appalachia, they'll throw an Appalachia. So Appalachia.
So you remember it's Appalachia.
Appalachia.
I'll
yeah.
remember.
Anyway. Yeah. Sorry.
They have the Wampus cat, as in like Kitty Wampus.
Cattywampus.
Cattywampus.
What does that mean?
Well, it comes from Wampus cat.
So when something's cattywampus, it's like off. It's wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is that there are tons of different versions of Wampus cats. So like sometimes they're like big panthery things with glowing eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's like Cherokee legends where it's like this woman who was cursed because she was like spying on the menfolk. So like they like cursed her and she became one with her cougar pelt that she was hiding under. There's also a woman whose husband was like killed by a demon. So she puts on like the special cat mask and like sneaks up on the demon and kills it and becomes like a protector of the area.
Nice.
And then meanwhile, we have the European settlers moving in and start telling stories about when they start suffering hardships because they don't know how to survive in this area.
Yeah.
They start blaming local witches.
Yes.
And supposedly catch women turning into cats. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we have a lot of cattywampus.
Well, and cats have always been, like, one of the go-to familiars for witches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the other thing I was interested in is, like, why cats and the feminine?
Yeah. Oh, God.
You know?
Yeah, seriously.
And so the first thing I was looking at was kind of, like, around the time period of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit earlier. Like in the 1880s. This actually goes back to what you were saying about the Ottoman Empire or like Muslim beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Also like Victorian era, that sort of stuff. There was this belief that women are drawn to cats because of their cleanliness and thus their like domestic caretaking tendencies.
Very
that they
much.
become like the right companion for a homemaker.
Yes. And I also noticed, because I was looking into this a little bit too, I think not to the depth that you did, but like I also noticed that like over and over again, kept referring to, like, again, the symbolism of the domestic cat, not a big cat, as, like, clean and submissive. And I'm like, have you ever met a cat?
Yeah. No, I saw stuff about them being untamable.
Yeah.
No, there was actually, so in, like, 1909, there was a woman, Dorothy Bevel Champion, who was talking about cats, and she wrote, "Cats are very sensitive in disposition and can easily be frightened by harsh treatment.
Okay, yes.
And that after the many cases I have seen of cat intelligence, I can only say if a cat is stupid, it is want of education." And she was specifically drawing a link from like views of women at the time and cats, because this was during like early suffrage movement stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this idea that like, women can be easily afraid, they can be sensitive, like these are ideas about women, that they can be stupid, but it's actually just because they're lacking education. It's because they're not having the same source, you know, the same resources that men are.
Yeah.
That like there are these actual sort of satirical connections being drawn between women and cats were really interesting. Yeah. But of course, the connection between cats and women are much older.
Yeah. I'm thinking ancient Egypt.
Yeah. Bast or Bastet.
Bastet, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And also Sekhmet.
Yes.
Are both in Egypt.
Yeah.
In Greece, we have Artemis and Hecate. In Norse mythology, we have Freya. In Hinduism, we have Durga. Mm-hmm. So all of these cats are goddesses who have some sort of links to cats. Mm-hmm. And they also often have links to either like magic or seduction or fertility, femininity. Like, as we said before in our Cabin Fever episode, actually, where we talked about Hecate, she is a goddess of like magic and witchcraft. And she has a lot of cat familiars. That's from Greek mythology. Mm-hmm. You wanted to talk a little bit about Bastet from Egyptian mythology.
Right. Bastet. And what's the other one?
Sekhmet.
So I looked into this just a little bit, and I found it really interesting. Again, the differentiation between a domestic cat and a big cat, right? So like Bastet
is the
domesticated cat, you know, kind of representing, you know, domestication.
She represents a lot of like fertility and love, and actually to connect that with the Norse mythology figure of Freya, she's also a goddess of love and fertility. Her chariot is driven by cats.
Oh wow. I would also like to point out that we are recording this on a Friday, which is the day of the week named after her. That's cool.
Yeah. So Bastet is a similar vein to that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Sekhmet, she is the kind of wild, untamable cat,
and
she has like a lion's
bit more of a protector.
She's very much a protector. Very first, she's
specifically women giving childbirth.
Oh, cool.
Or women in childbirth.
I know she's a big deal, like, warrior.
Yeah.
And, like, she was one of the most common goddess to, like, show up in a lot of Egyptian art and stuff, because she's this big deal protector in general and warrior.
Yeah.
Similar to Durga in Hinduism.
Okay.
Like, these are both gods who are also perhaps, like, mothers and goddesses, and, you know, in that way and stuff. But they're, like, these really fierce protectors with these cat associations. Durga, her association in Hinduism, she actually has a tiger that she rides into battle.
Yes, she does.
Yeah. Going back to the, like, Christian understandings. So we have these kind of good understandings with panthers and stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah.
But there are also Christian, like, medieval beliefs that link cats to Lilith.
Oh, okay.
Because, like cats, Adam's first wife refused to be tamed.
That's true. Yeah.
And that's sort of how cats are seen. They're sort of seen as consorting with the devil.
Yeah.
And, like, you can sort of pretend that you've got them tamed, but you never really have a cat tamed. It's always just a little bit wild.
Yeah. It's always just kind of doing what it wants to do.
Yeah. And so now, even in modern day, sort of like modern Wiccans often associate cats with, like, the divine feminine. And it's sort of because they stand between the familiar and the wild in that way that domestic cats do, where they are these kind of really wild creatures that you kind of have domesticated, but they're always just a little bit still untamable.
Yeah, they're predators and prey.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then they also have these ideas about how they thrive in moonlight or like by intuition.
The nighttime. Cats are nocturnal.
Yeah.
This is true.
And then the idea of, like, panthers and, like, other black cats, including, like, domestic small black cats.
Right.
In particular, being representative of, like, the darker, earthier, mysterious energy that also is, like, kind of a part of the feminine archetype in a lot of, like, Wiccan understandings. You know? So that's all of the stuff we're working with when it comes to understanding the cats.
Right.
But let's talk about what would actually be going on with Serbian folklore.
Right, because you said a lot of wolves.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me, honestly.
Yeah, because, I found it interesting because, the story is sort of focused on cat people, which, from what I could see in my reading, doesn't really read as, like, a Serbian folklore or anything like that. Also, this is kind of an aside, but I also wondered, kind of as I was watching the movie, if maybe Irena had parts of the myth wrong. Like, not beyond just maybe it wasn't cats, maybe it was, like, wolves or something. Right. But also, like...
Or maybe the myth evolved.
Yeah, or that it evolved. Yeah, not that she, like, got it wrong. But that it's, like, changed a lot.
Yeah.
Because, like, supposedly you turn into a panther because of, like, you know, that desire, that kissing and stuff. But, like, when we see her first do it, it's when she's stalking Alice, which is where that, like, gay desire stuff comes in.
Yeah, definitely.
But there's no actual, like, kissing that happens there.
No.
And, like, the only time she does kiss and then kill someone is the psychiatrist.
Yes.
But she doesn't love him, and that's supposed to be a part of the
And
myth.
also, like, he kisses her, but, like, we see her not kiss him back.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then I was like, is there something maybe from that? Like, these other cat women were maybe appearing not out of, like, this overpowering lust or love, but, like, rage.
Yeah.
And having their boundaries
Passion,
passed
man.
over.
Passion can be
like,
anything. Yeah.
You know, and, like, maybe that they were defending themselves.
Yeah.
And, like, were the women in her village actually turned into the villains because, you know, stories are written by the victors.
Right.
And it was actually that they said no to these men's desires and so were slain and then turned into these, like, cat people horrible by the victors retelling the story. Like, I'm sort of connecting King John's sword through the panther to the psychiatrist's sword through her.
Right.
As this, like, rejection of this guy, and so the guy stabs her. You know, it's like, it's not because she was evil. It's because she didn't want you, motherfucker.
Yeah. And she makes it very clear, right? So, like, I think about, at least with my cat, you know, and, like, and other cats and, like, domesticated cats, right? Like, if they don't like something or don't want something, they make it very clear.
Yeah.
There's usually...
They're really good with consent.
You need, and, like, you need to understand, like, how cats communicate.
Yeah.
But, like, once you understand how cats communicate, you can be like, okay, my cat's not into this, right? And, like, and... You know, and then some people are just like, oh my gosh, your cat just, like, attacked me, like, you know, like, was so unprovoked. And I was like, well, if you understood
it was
the signs
very
it was
provoked.
giving you that it didn't want you to do what you were doing, then you wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah. So I kind of was re-looking at the story in that way. And I was also thinking about how often in a lot of mythologies and folklores, it's easy to see, like, whenever, often when you see, like, a man acting against some sort of beast or figure or something like that, that often it's actually also a story that's happening at the same time of, like, war or conquest. So then I was wondering about, like, is there some sort of conquest actually going on in this story? it's like different when it's like a god figure who's, taking down a woman or a beast or something, where it's often like, okay, maybe a natural disaster or a plague or something. Yeah. But like when it's a man with a sword named King,
I'm like, a phallic symbol.
I'm like, that's kind of conquesty.
Yeah.
So I went into the Serbian folklore store looking for that stuff.
Yeah.
And was pleased to find that there is a long history of like Serbian epic poetry and folklore and stuff.
Oh.
A lot of it covering the era of the Ottoman Empire's occupation.
Yeah.
And like while there are some non-historical poems kind of like about Slavic mythology and stuff, like a lot of them are historical events, not super accurate, but historical events dealing with like occupation and like resistance. And so like it started to make a lot of sense because like as you were talking about, Serbia is on that border between kind of like the East and the West and has these overlapping influences. I saw one talking about how Serbian folklore really blossomed when old pagan beliefs started to mix with like new Christian beliefs. So like it really all is coming out of this like mixing of these clashing of cultures. So there's like various different figures who come up like a lot. One of the big ones that I found was this guy named Prince Marco. Reading about him had the same sort of feel of reading about like medieval romance things about like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Okay. Like he has very that feel. And in this case, he's like actually a historical figure. Like he's a real guy that existed during the occupation of the Ottoman Empire. Like, but then suddenly in the stories, he's this guy who lived for like 300 years.
Whoa.
He was breastfed by a forest nymph and got superpowers. Like, and he sort of like becomes this representation of like the spirit of Serbia under the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of what a lot of Serbian stories are about. I also wanted to look into like specific instances of shapeshifting because I was like, okay, if we don't have cats specifically, what do we have?
Yeah. Wolves.
Yeah. Okay. Though I didn't see a lot of shapeshifting with them.
Okay.
So, except for when it comes to vampires. Of course. I said, they have their own.
Right.
And vampires are known for turning into animals. I saw in Serbian myths like wolves, horses, and sheep. I was like, that's cute. Little vampire sheep.
Not bats?
No.
Okay.
I didn't see it.
Okay.
This was fun. I found that jackals are sometimes considered half human because they wail like human infants.
Oh.
And I was like, that sounds exactly what Irina said about how like the roaring of lions is natural and soothing, but she hates the sound of the panther because it screams like a woman. Yeah. If she had that sort of myth growing up about the jackals, maybe being half human because of the way they wail, and then moving here and hearing the panther, it makes sense that she would maybe cling to the panther as something.
Heck yeah.
But the other thing that I thought was really interesting, important, you might know about this actually. Have you heard of vilas?
Vilas?
Yeah,
no.
Vila. The only reason why I thought you might have is because J.K. Rowling sort of vaguely appropriates them in one of her books. And she's one of the Triwizard Tournament. No, not Triwizard. Fleur de la Cour.
Fleur de la Cour. What about her?
She's a quarter Vila.
And what are they? What do they do?
The way it sounds like in J.K. Rowling's book is that she's sort of like a siren.
Right, yeah.
They're a little more complicated than that.
Yeah.
As things often are after J.K. Rowling takes them.
Yeah.
Vilas are like nature nymphs. When I talked about Prince Marco being breastfed by like a nymph,
a little
it was a vila.
Oh, okay.
They're kind of like fairies, elves, that sort of thing.
Fae.
Fae, that sort of. So they're often beautiful maidens, but they can also be like whirlwinds, which is cool. And also they shapeshift into animals. Okay. Usually swans, falcons, horses, and wolves.
Okay.
Because those are the like actually prominent animals in the area. Yeah. I'm sure if cats were around, they would have been doing that too.
Yep. Totally. Yep.
And it's like they're mostly benevolent to humans, if a little bit weird. But like if you if you like break an agreement with them or you offend them in some way, then they can turn really malicious.
Fae. Yeah.
Yeah, they have that vibe. Yeah. And actually they do have kind of a siren vibe because supposedly like their dancing and their beautiful voices can lure men in, possibly
crash
to their doom.
Ships on craggy rocks.
Yeah. There are also, to keep in line with Fae, some stories about them stealing children and leaving changelings behind.
Of course. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And then there are like different myths about like where Vila come from. Right. So there's some about how a lot of them start with a normal girl who was like maybe cursed in some way. So like she died unbaptized. Sure. Okay. Or she just had a really frivolous life, or she was really proud, or she was like betrayed by a lover and just wanted revenge too much. And for all these reasons, she gets like cursed by God to become this sort of semi-immortal being. Which I'm like, cool, sign me up.
Yeah.
But then in some versions, this curse also has, I found this out on a YouTube channel called Chekhov's Pistol. It had some like good mythology on it.
Oh, that's cool.
So he was talking about some versions of the story where the curse involves never being able to find your beloved. Or if you do find him, your beloved will suffer a horrible death.
Wow.
Isn't that literally what Irina is afraid of?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yep.
The one other thing I want to take from Serbian mythology and folklore is that in some folk tales, there is the appearance of the Black Arab.
Oh, no.
This is I would not bring it up if it was not relevant.
I don't know why I was so surprised by that.
Yeah.
Like, duh. Yeah.
But it's like, okay, so sometimes it's like a bandit.
Are we talking about the Mamelukes?
We're going to get there.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're getting there. Oh, warming up.
Let me just get settled in here.
Okay, so sometimes it's just sort of like a bandit who's kidnapping women, but also sometimes this Black Arab is like literally a devil. And there are stories where that same Prince Marco fights the Black Arab.
So can I just let me just take a wild guess here.
Yes, please do.
Black Arab, literally dark-skinned.
Yeah.
And I imagine a follower of Islam.
Yup.
Oh, yeah, you can't do that.
Yup.
Oh, boy.
And then bringing that to the Mamelukes.
Okay, yes.
What I could find is that
I'm actually, I again, I did a little bit of research in this, but it was really a skim. So I'm really interested to learn about this.
Yeah.
Is it an ethnic group? What?
No. Okay. So
just tell me.
Mamelukes, I'm assuming the way she says it is kind of weird.
Yeah.
But Mameluk.
Yeah, okay.
Is a non-Arab, ethnically diverse soldier slave and freed slave group who served in the military for the Ottoman Empire and other Arab dynasties.
So they're
according to Wikipedia,
they're a soldier class, a warrior class?
Yes, but they're often slaves.
Or freed slaves. Okay.
And they were recruited from many parts of the empire.
Yes.
And other places that the Ottoman Empire and other Arab dynasties, interacted with. So through the Middle East, but also Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
So that could have included Serbians. I did not see anything in my...
I would not be surprised.
In my quick research of anything of Mamluks having any particular history there.
Uh-huh.
There are a lot of places, including in Egypt, where Mamluks as the soldier class, actually were able to gain a lot of political power. They even had their own dynasty in Egypt. So so it seems, I don't know. I just felt from that, even though I couldn't find anything specifically about Mamluks in Serbia, it seems possible that maybe that's just some sort of shorthand for Arab or Muslim or something like that.
Yeah.
Basically Ottoman Empire in contrast to the Christian Serbs.
Yeah.
So I think that's what she means when she was in my village, these scary Mamluks took us away from Christianity.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the Mamluks themselves, they weren't necessarily Muslim because a lot of them still held to their religions from where they came from.
Right, yeah.
And things like that. So it's a weird shorthand to use for that.
Yeah.
But it's the only thing I can think of.
It's so unfortunate because Irena specifically understands what it means to be out of place where she is and understands what it's like to be othered and and to be distilled down to an essence rather than her entire humanity.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's sort of what I'm thinking with the Mamluks.
Yeah.
That's the best I've got.
So so these Mamelukes, they were enslaved.
Some of them, or they started out as slaves and then were freed later, or...
And now, doesn't Irena say something about, enslaving the people of her village? Or am I making... Okay.
Yeah, kind of.
So
she talks about that.
Are enslaved people enslaving people?
Well, that's why I don't think... Because that's the other thing, is that I don't think that Mamluks had a particular presence in Serbia.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah.
There were other sort of soldiers and stuff that would have been there, that would have been Ottomans. So I'm wondering if that's just sort of Basically, I'm wondering if that's a flaw of the writers, being okay, what's a weird, vague way we can talk about the Ottoman Empire or Muslims or Arabs? Oh, here's a good one that doesn't really work for the Serbian area. I could be wrong though, just for mine. So I think it's a shorthand that the writers are using that doesn't really fit with Irena and her history, but we're dealing with it.
Huh.
So I'm just sort of replacing it with the Ottoman Empire, and versus,
and again,
King John, who's our Christian
an empire that's around for literally 600 years, right? And is honestly on its last leg.
Yeah.
By the time Irena comes around.
Yeah.
By the time she's born. It's almost World War I.
Yeah.
The Ottoman Empire has lost significant amount of land, significant amount of influence and power. But obviously that doesn't change hundreds of years of history.
Right.
Of,
And well, that's why I was wondering about cats
Yeah.
in the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
Because I'm wondering then if I think of the Mamluks
Mhm.
as maybe just being shorthand for like Arab or Muslim or something like
Mhm.
that, could that cat be representing perhaps like some sort of heraldic image for like some sort of Muslim ruler, leader?
Now, help me out. What does that word mean? Heraldic?
Like something they would use on their flags when they went into battle.
Oh, like a herald.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So that like possibly this statue of this king putting his sword through a cat is
Right.
actually being like, here's this Christian sir putting a sword through
Yeah.
some sort of
And
Muslim ruler.
Irina even mentions it. She's like, "Oh, it's not actually a cat; it's a symbol
Yeah.
for evil and sin." You
Yeah.
know, and like she gets it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then that means the only thing we have left is who the fuck King John the First of Serbia is.
Yeah. Who's King John the First?
Okay.
It sounds like an anglicized name if I've ever heard one.
Okay. Remember when I said that I was going to have to rely on Wikipedia a bit myself too?
Yep.
I had a really hard time finding English sources.
Hmm.
And a lot of the English sources I did find were just copy pasted straight from Wikipedia.
Oh.
So take all of this with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But King John is possibly Jovan Nenad.
I think yes. I think you're right.
Yes, you saw this too.
Yes.
Jovan is a Serbian form of John.
Yes.
There are like 2 or 3 other prominent Jovans in Serbian history that I found. But like Jovan Nenad is the only one who was like a king or the equivalent of. He like called himself a czar or an emperor.
Because he would. Yeah. That would have been
But like, yeah, okay.
correct. Yeah.
And anyway, even if it's not him, all of the Jovans I found were in some way fighting for like Serbian liberation from Ottoman rulers.
Wow.
So there you go. Jovan Nenad, he actually only reigned from like 1526 to 1527. He had like a 2-year reign.
Oh, okay.
And it wasn't exactly acknowledged by literally anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually this like military leader, ruler. He had like some Serbian mercenaries that he led. And he sort of took advantage of the Ottoman Empire fighting against the Hungarian king. And while all that was going on, he was like, what if I just took a little place for myself right here in the Pannonian Plain?
Okay.
Is where he was like, this is just going to be my land now.
Yeah. I'm in charge of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got my force of Serbian mercenaries who are
Yeah.
going to protect it. So what you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And for 2 years, not a lot.
Nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he like spent some time because, yeah, as you showed me on that map,
Yes.
like
okay.
Serbia is sort of stuck in between Austria-Hungary
Yep.
and the Ottoman Empire.
Yep.
And so he just sort of took his little spot.
Yep.
But had to like spend a lot of time. There were like 2 different Hungarian kings who were like, I'm the king. No, I'm the king.
Yes.
So you're like,
yeah. Austria-Hungary had a dual monarchy.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So he was like kind of sided with one. So then he was like, doing some raiding against some like different Hungarian villages to help out that king. But like, whatever. His big deal thing that he always said he was all about was liberating Serbian lands from the Ottoman Empire.
Uh-huh.
And he had a number of victories. Eventually, he was actually defeated by one of the Hungarian kings. And, like, he was killed while he was trying to connect with some of his allies, But, like, since then, he's become this kind of mythical hero, supposedly,
Of
in
the Serbs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And some people consider him the founder of the autonomous province of Vojvodina,
Okay.
which I guess is still a place that exists.
I love that.
I was hoping you knew something about it.
Sorry, I don't. Let me
Ah.
refer back to my map, though. Do you want to go ahead and say that word again?
Yeah, it's Vojvodina.
Vojvodina. It's right there. Yep.
Yeah.
It's borders Hungary and Romania. Yep.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
there.
So supposedly he was like the first
So
guy
kind
who
of
was like,
the northern part of Serbia.
yeah.
Got it.
He was like, we're going to be free, liberated, all on our own, do our own thing, autonomous province. I guess there's some debate about whether it makes sense that he actually did that. But still, in one of their big major cities, they have a big statue of him.
Huh.
And it has on it, your thought has prevailed. It's like carved on the statue.
Oh.
As in like, you did liberate Serbia.
Yes.
We have our autonomous place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Supposedly. Like I said, this all comes from Wikipedia, so I don't know.
Huh.
But so yeah, so I feel like this myth that Irena tells sounds very much like the sort of myth that would have been told about like a Prince Marco figure who's fighting against like monsters and has
Right.
these sort of mythical aspects and also is maybe fighting against Black Arabs.
And-
Ooh.
Yeah.
But also has that sort of mixture of the historical, which would come up a lot in their epic poetry, where it has this actual King John figure.
And there would be like the idea of shape shifting and like
Yeah.
a man having animal characteristics as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the ideas of these like vila, who are like these nymphs who can be beautiful women and lure men, and also. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how much work they actually put into it when they were making the movie, but I feel like it does kind of fit, with the exception of the fact that cats.
The cat thing, yeah.
Unless it is sort of like for the Ottoman Empire, a symbol of that. That's the only way I can really make it work, because it's not a super Serbian image. So that's Serbian folklore.
Wow, I love that.
Now we know so much about Serbia.
I know. I can't. I'm gonna go to Serbia now.
I know. I know everything about you.
Everything about
Wikipedia.
Serbia. Are we ready to bring it back to the U.S. of A?
Yeah.
Let's. So this movie was produced in 1942, and so the Hays Code, which is a kind of quick set of rules of things that should never happen in a Hollywood film, or should only happen under very specific circumstances, right? Kind of as a way to, censor and impose a certain specific idea of morality in American film media.
And this is the only movie we've watched thus far, at least. That would have been...
This is the oldest film we've watched so far, yeah.
So this was in middle of the Hays Code.
Yeah, very much informed by that, yes.
Yeah, which is how we can have a movie that is very much sort of like preoccupied with like sex and sexuality, but also very like, I don't know, tame by modern standards.
Very much so. Yes. Yeah. So it actually starts in like the late 20s. This Catholic priest, his name is Daniel A. Lord, started writing production code for Hollywood films because he understood, and I think this person was very smart. He understood how powerful of a medium film was, right? And I was like, heck yeah, it is. I almost kind of wish people were kind of taking social media more seriously in this way.
Yeah.
He knew that film was a really powerful medium, and was powerful for the corruption of morals, especially for kids, right? And this poses a threat to the church, right? Yep. In the height of the Depression, Hollywood, obviously the studios, it's harder for them to make money because less people have less money to go spend to go see a movie, right? So they started to create movies that appealed to a, quote, morbid curiosity. So we're talking sexual scenes, right? Glamorization of gangsters and organized crime. And a quote-unquote reflection of class struggle.
Oh, no.
All big no-nos.
Yeah,
for
not the class
church.
Struggle.
So,
don't remind people they're poor.
This is really interesting because Hollywood was under like a lot of pressure from governments because for a while movies did not count as speech. They weren't protected as speech, right? And the government is also kind of concerned about like, okay, what are you putting in these films that are like very highly accessible to the population at large, right? So Hollywood goes in favor of internal regulation as opposed to a government regulation, right? Because, the laws are different between states. So like, the kind of things that could be shown in a film in Texas are not going to be the same thing that you could get in, in Massachusetts, right? So they're like, you know what, we'll internally regulate, we'll create what would become the Hays Code, right?
Yeah.
And so it is broken up. It's quite straightforward. It's literally a list of 11 don'ts and 25 be carefuls.
Ooh, be careful.
So obviously all of these help communicate to an audience what is moral, right? And therefore good. Also, the censorship helps keep social control. Anything immoral, anything on that be careful list, right, needs to be punished or like made to repent, right? And as you can imagine, pretty quickly, writers, directors, producers get really tired of this like moral grandstanding. So Hays Code is technically in place until 1968, although certainly by 59, like everybody's just ignoring it. Yeah. Nobody's following code, right? So, but the Hays Code is technically in place until 1968, and it gets replaced with the MPAA.
Right.
Or now called the MPA. So the MPA, are you aware of how bullshit the MPA is?
I am.
It's total bullshit. So it's kind of like the second stage of the Hays Code because it's very common for movies that have like a queer sex scene to have a much more restrictive rating than a movie with a similar sex scene between heterosexuals, right?
Yep.
So the MPAA, I mean, it's not much better, but like at least now, like there are more like artistic freedoms for writers, directors, producers to like kind of do whatever they want with their movie, just keeping in mind the rating it's going to get. So that's basically like the legacy of the Hays Code now, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that Cat People is made during the Hays Code era. And so there's a lot they can't do. What this means to me is like basically any other can kind of put themselves into this narrative and connect with Irena, right? So like immigrants, women, queer people, people of color, people who maybe aren't Christian, right? Like any other who can't explicitly be talked about due to Hays Code don'ts and be carefuls.
Yeah.
It kind of, you know, the cat people is sort of just like a catch-all.
Yeah.
A nice, safe, code appropriate way of being like, and then there's everybody else.
Yeah.
You know?
I think Irena has some, you know, some particular lines that we can pull out that sort of really speak to that, where she has, you know, her and Oliver say that they love each other for the first time. She's talking about how she still doesn't want to kiss him.
Yeah.
And she says, I've lived in dread of this moment. I never wanted to love with you. I stayed away from people, lived alone.
Yep.
I fled from the past, from things you could never know or understand, evil things. It's very much this feeling of being some sort of outsider, whatever type of outsider it is.
Yep.
And knowing that the, you know, the normal people will never be able to understand you and will see you as something evil, and therefore wanting to just sort of keep yourself away from it all.
Yeah.
As like a safety thing, but also as like this sort of like self-hating thing, self-loathing thing.
And like, you know, knowing that, again, like that you cannot fit into the box.
Yeah.
So like, why try?
And I think it's really interesting in contrast to Alice, who I think Alice is very like good girl vibes.
Very. Did you also notice, this is something that I noticed not until later after we watched it, but like in the stalking scene, right, where we don't see Irena because she is the panther, right, but like we see
the
shadows and all that stuff. And so also Alice, like one of the main characters we haven't talked about much yet, hat game on point, right? Like 10 out of 10, every hat.
40s movies.
Every hat, just, yes. And the hat that she is wearing, and I would actually like to go back and watch this movie and kind of look at her hats a little bit more, like, you know, analytically. But in that, you know, quote unquote stalking scene, she is wearing a hat with feathers on it.
Oh, like
so,
a bird.
like she's a bird. Yeah. And Irena is like stalking her as kind of like a plaything, you know, and like lets her go. Well, only because, you know, the bus comes and, like, she scurries
Which
away.
supposedly is, like, the first jump scare. That bus coming.
Yes.
Right, when she's being
and
stalked.
especially to use sound for the jump scare as opposed to the visual. Yeah.
They started calling it, like, the Luton bus, and they would, like, use it in all of his movies to have, like, a jump scare of some sort.
Huh.
And they would call it the bus. Because they were doing a lot of cool new shit.
Yeah, we're like kind of on the verge of noir, and you know, this is like Cat People is kind of meant to be in direct competition with like the Universal monster movies.
Yeah,
so
and something sort of like smarter and sleeker and suspenseful, but not like scary in that same way.
Yeah.
But back to Alice being a good girl. She's just so interesting because there's that part where Oliver's like, Alice, you're very swell.
Yeah.
And she's like, that's what makes me dangerous. I'm the new type of other woman. With this idea of like, the thing that, you know, the American man is actually going to go for is the, like, morally upright woman. The woman who's, like, you know.
Who wears great hats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, like, to compare her vision of love to Irena's, who's, like, so afraid of it and so, doesn't want a part of it. She says she knows exactly what love is. She says, it's understanding. It's you and me, and let the rest of the world go by. It's just the two of us living our lives together happily and proudly. No self-torture and no doubt. And I really love that, especially when we think of, like, really any of those sort of others. I'm sort of thinking of it from a gay perspective.
Sure.
Of having that thing, that dread, that moment of dread when you're in a society where the sort of love that you feel is, like, criminalized, of not wanting to get there. And then to have as its opposite the sort of like the gay dream of being able to live together happily and proudly and not afraid of it, of something that, like, you know, any of these sort of othered groups would long for.
And not have to pretend that like you're roommates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're also still, we haven't actually really talked about the gay shit.
No, I like to always, I always like to save the gay shit for last.
Well, then let's get into it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, you know, like I mentioned earlier, you know, we were talking about how, this kind of allegory of the other could mean so many things.
Yeah.
Right. And like, to me, what really hits it home is like the immigrant experience. Right. But yeah, there's totally ways that in which, like, especially, like a queer person could see themselves.
Yeah.
And their queerness reflected in the character of Irina. Right. And you know what, honestly, that made me think of was X-Men.
I see what you mean.
Because I think X-Men is traditionally meant to be an allegory for Jews.
X-Men
I think about Magneto.
Well, yeah, he explicitly is
Yeah,
Jewish.
yeah.
No,
it's text, not subtext.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think in general, X-Men, part of the I guess joy, the use of the X-Men is that they always have been used as a symbol of like oppression and othering.
Yeah.
That could sort of be blanketed over everything.
Exactly.
Yep. In that same way. We have like, for the longest time, Bobby Drake being like gay coded, but not being able to come out until very recently. That's Iceman. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
But then we also have like Magneto, who's actually Jewish and is coming at, his idea of like being a mutant oppressed by humans is very much informed by the fact that he lived through the Holocaust and almost died, and then we have like a lot of other, queer coded characters, but then we also have characters of color. The X-Men have a lot more characters of color in like early comics than a lot of the other teams have. Like they have a lot of Native American characters who you like hardly see in any other superhero
oh my gosh,
teams,
yeah, that's,
and they have like tons.
That's cool.
Yeah,
because I actually remember when we were in college, it was senior year, we were in Spring's house and we were watching an X-Men movie, and our roommate was like kind of half watching, like doing other stuff and kind of watching, and like I don't think she had a lot of X-Men knowledge, like no judgment, neither do I, you know, like it's okay. And she was like, oh, so it's like gay people.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah,
but also no.
And
no, there's that famous part, it became a whole meme, where Rogue, who is the X-Men who sucks the life force out of people when she touches
the powers
them.
Of someone else,
and like causes a lot of damage to anybody she wants to be close to and like can't touch people.
Yeah.
She finds out that there's a possible cure for mutants, for being a mutant, and she's like, there's a cure. And then Storm, the woman who can control weather and is considered a literal goddess, it's like, there is no cure because there's nothing wrong with us.
Right.
And it's like, that's easy for you to say.
Yeah.
So like in that sense, it doesn't really work as like a metaphor for like any sort of oppressed group that much, because so many of them have so many different needs, which is why it can be kind of a catch-all. You can look at some of them and be like, oh, this being's gay. Yeah. Oh, this being's, Jewish. This being's in this sort of different way. But like to look at them as a whole, it's like, oh, the only thing I saw that was kind of working was like to look at it as like a disability allegory,
and how some people can still pass.
Yeah, possibly as a race allegory, because you have a lot of different, like if you try to single it as like, the black experience or something, it's not going to work. But like there's a lot of different races. There's a lot of different disabilities who all have different needs and different oppressions and different, all sorts of things.
And I'm still thinking of X-Men, and we'll get back to cat people, but I think I think it's relevant. Like I think about, because like each mutant in X-Men is like has a different power, right? That has different pros and cons to it. And it kind of makes me think about like all the different ways someone can be queer.
Yeah.
Right? So like there are easier ways to be queer, like being a cisgendered gay man is a way different experience than being like a trans woman of color.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And being like a bi person who is quote unquote passing because they're in a straight relationship has its own downsides, obviously, by being, made invisible in your own community.
Right.
But also means that you have an easier time, perhaps,
being able to go through life.
Yeah, being able to access a lot of resources.
Yes,
like marriage. I mean, that's changed since then,
Right,
but,
insurance.
Yeah.
Housing.
Yeah.
Employment.
Adoption.
All of it.
Yeah.
So this is also, so like Cat People is like renowned as like really queer coded movie.
Yeah.
In the Hays Code era.
Yeah.
And so like, let's just talk about how specifically, like where's the queerness here?
Well, there are the parts I already talked about like the way they talk about love.
Yes.
There's, I mean, a little bit, I think, with Oliver, with his insistent that's like, you're so normal, you're gonna marry me, and how he's like thinks that like heterosexism is gonna save her, that he's gonna like cure her with his straight manness.
Yes.
Yeah, There's the line we talked about earlier with her talking about how she envies all of the other women on the
Yes.
street.
Oh my gosh.
Because they make their husbands happy.
And they're free.
Yeah.
Right. Whew. Yeah.
Irina's general sort of like, I love silence, I love loneliness, I love the dark,
love the darkness,
things.
yeah, and kind of considering like, and again, like, you know, I still think that the panther represents sexuality overall,
yeah,
and sort of like the keeping sexuality in the darkness, especially non-heterosexual sexuality, as like, yeah, keeping it in the darkness, keeping it in the shadows, keeping it kind of out of sight for the general public, right?
Yeah,
and then that makes people feel alone, like they're the only ones who feel that way, right? Like, so Irina is kind of like projecting all of these other women are happy,
right? Because
they're happy, they make their husbands happy. It's like, Irina, you don't know that.
Yeah,
you know, like you feel
you've already established you don't have friends, so
yeah. Like you might think that because that's like the facade they're putting on, but like that's not what life is like.
Yeah,
you know.
And then we have, of course, the gayness, I guess, of like I talked about how supposedly the myth of her turning into a cat is when she falls in love. The first time she actually really does turn into a cat. The 2 times we see her turn into a cat is to go after, of course, Alice.
Go after Alice, yep.
I have little things that kind of pinged my gaydar.
Sure.
In line with that general stalking of Alice, there's Irena calling Alice just to hear her say hello and then like
hang up. Yes.
I mean, she's looking for Oliver at the time, but still, it's like,
and then like also Alice like gets it.
Yeah.
Like she picks up on it. She's like, I think it's Irina. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
I do think also in general, Alice just sort of felt a little dykey to me. I don't know, just because she's like, she's working with the boys. She's like the one who's like, let's take a cigarette break. I'll smoke my cigarette. And he's not even smoking, but she is.
Yeah.
And she has this whole thing about like, oh, I don't need to be walked home because I'm a big girl and I'm not afraid. You know, she's just like, I don't know. Got some big dyke energy.
What is her job? Because like she's obviously not like a secretary.
Yeah, no, I think she just is one of the engineers.
Do you think she's an engineer?
Something like it.
Okay.
She's probably, honestly, she's probably a computer.
Yeah, probably. Because like because and she's also the one who, cause like when she's with Oliver to like try and like catch up with Irina in the apartment and she like doesn't show and she's just like, we got to get back to work.
Yeah.
You know? And like the way it seems is like he's saying things and she's writing them down.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, maybe more like a computer or something.
I think she's probably calculating numbers for their stuff.
Yeah.
Also, I guess probably the biggest lesbian moment in the movie is literally just the way that Irina smirks at Alice after she scares her in the pool. The way she's sort of like she's just smirking at her.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that part was pretty lesbian.
Also, you know what really like pinged my gaydar is the other Serbian woman in the restaurant saying moja sestra, my sister, right? And so obviously like you could say that as like, oh, they're both Serbian.
Yeah.
They're sisters in that way. Yeah. Or like the way that
you clock each other.
Lesbians can, or, you know, see each other as like, it's my sister, friend, you know, like what do they
call them? Family.
Family, friend of Dorothy, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah,
like,
that whole idea.
Yeah, there's a sister. That's another member of the sewing circle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also have that Alice loves cats that we mentioned before.
Oh,
and,
yeah,
like,
she loves cats.
Irina is a cat, so, like, I don't know. There's a cat for you right there.
Yeah.
She recognizes Irina's perfume. She's like, it's her perfume. It's strong and sweet.
Yeah.
Like, okay, Katie, I see you.
And it's so interesting because, like, Oliver is there and, like, and Alice is, like, the other woman who, like, is in love with Oliver, you know? But it's like, what if Oliver wasn't there?
Yeah, what if Oliver wasn't there? And then... what sort of got, because I was kind of with you where I was like, yeah, I get the gay subtext, but it's not like standing out to me as much as like some other things. I don't get why this is like something that's brought up as like an early lesbian text or whatever.
Right.
Early. There was an article on Autostraddle by Drew Gregory about cat people and then also The Seventh Victim, which is another Fallon feature.
Yeah.
Talking about, you know, DeWitt Bodine is the writer who's gay. He was gay. Like, that's fact. But this article, Drew Gregory, she's talking about DeWitt Bodine and sort of imagining him writing the script through the perspective of sort of articulating his gay desires. And so then it's like, what happens when we imagine Irina as like a gay man? And then it's her struggle with her desire for Ollie. It's her fear of like consummating that, contrasted with like, you know, the ease that he has in his relationship with Alice.
Right.
You know, she gets to have that really simple love with Oliver, whereas Oliver having this relationship with Irina, if it was like more of a gay man, gay love sort of thing, that being the first time he's unhappy because that's the first time he's had to like, that's the first time love hasn't been easy.
Yeah.
And it's like, because that's the love that society isn't allowing. And so Oliver is just Oliver is the one who wants to actually revert to that like safe confines of like heterosexuality, the ease of going out with a woman like Alice.
Because maybe Oliver, given that reading of it, is more bisexual and could, again, thinking about like a person in two parts, right? Be like, okay, like I'm interested in this aspect of myself, but society tells me I can't.
Yeah, nothing about this will be easy.
So I guess I can forget that part of myself and just focus on the part that will make my life easier.
Yeah. So I don't know. That just sort of made the film work more for me as like subtextually gay than anything else I had read did.
Yeah, sure.
Because it wasn't like super subtextually like dykey.
Yeah.
I mean, she is sort of like, Irina, is sort of like haunting Alice as like perhaps a specter of lesbianhood or something. But I don't know. But yeah, the idea of reading Irina is more just sort of like gayness in general and gay desire in general and making it a little less literal about it and sort of like the difficulty of wanting to express that love, the fear of wanting to express that love, the safety in being alone when you feel only that kind of love, you know?
Right.
Versus the ease of just, you know, being a straighty McStraight.
So I just find it really interesting that what happens? Irena attacks Dr. Judd.
Yeah.
Kills him.
Fuck yeah, you
but
do, girl.
She does get stabbed.
Yeah, his sword does get in her.
So, but she does make it back to the zoo, right? Because she's got the key.
Yeah.
To
unleash
the panther, right? And it's interesting because just like though I understand it's the 40s, like it's whatever, but like the way that they film it is like the panther just kind of jumps on her and she just falls down dead.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I mean, I know you've been stabbed, but what?
Yeah. I think it was supposed to be kind of a mauling or...
Yeah, it just kind of looked like a pounce and then off into the street. And then we see the panther gets out of the cage and that is immediately hit by a cat, right?
It's just like, let's just tie up this loose end.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting because like that panther spends the entire movie caged up in this tiny little cage, pacing back and forth, obviously stressed out, right? And then the minute that it is released from its cage, it dies, right?
Yeah.
So like there is no freedom for this panther.
Yeah.
And by extension, Irena, right?
Yeah.
And I asked myself, like, I wrote in my notes, Irena releases the cat to release herself, and then in parentheses, die. Because, like, you know, I think people could see death as like a symbolic release, right? You know?
You could also see
and sort of the ultimate freedom in some ways.
I was going to say in haste code terms.
Yes.
Death is also used as like a form of repentance.
Yes, right.
This could also be her getting free in the sense of getting free of her sins.
Yes.
Repenting.
And
through death.
Right. And like if you're going to have a lesbian.
Yeah.
They
better die at the end.
They'd better die at the end, yeah. Or repent and be not a lesbian anymore. Yeah. So I just thought that imagery was really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that panther is like has freedom for like a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
And it gets hit by a cap, right? So like it's kind of it's honestly a pretty sad ending. Like there's this kind of air that like there's no freedom.
Yeah.
Your freedom is death.
Yeah. I think that's part of what kills me about Ollie's last line about like,
oh yeah,
you know, she never lied to us. It's like,
okay.
This is like this huge tragic thing. That's all you have to say. Like,
yeah.
Woo.
Like, don't you understand what just happened?
Yeah. Like that is a woman who is also a panther who has been stabbed by a psychiatrist you brought her in touch with.
Yeah.
Like.
And was driven to do something pretty irrational.
Yeah. And it's like super fucking tragic. But yeah, okay, you and Alice are just going to get married.
And apparently that is, again, I haven't seen the sequel, but it's my understanding that is the sequel, is that Alice and Oliver get married.
Mm-hmm.
They have a child, a young girl, I believe.
Yep.
And I think Simone comes back as like kind of like a specter, like a ghost.
She's like an imaginary friend maybe or something like that.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. So like, queerness invades safe straight spaces again, you know, and like, oh no, they're coming for the kid this time, you know.
Another thing I found interesting in that same Autostraddle article I was reading, because it also was talking about the seventh victim, that there's also another character who could be very, you know, lesbian coded. But also that Dr. Judd is in that movie.
He is! Yes!
It's the Dr. Judd cinematic universe of all people. This has been Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots. Join us next time for the first part of our Grindhouse double feature. We'll be discussing Planet Terror, and then the episode after that, we'll be talking about Death Proof.
Yep, that's how double features work. Yep. And hey, don't forget, because we've been forgetting, we have an Instagram. It's at Deep Thoughts, Shallow Plots, all one word, lowercase.
And we got, you know, cool art and pictures of us, I think, and reminders of latest episodes and all sorts of good stuff. In lieu of our normal ending, we have a special treat this time. Sound guy Matt is going to play us out with a special little ditty. Take it away, Matt.
Cat people got no reason. Cat people got no reason. Cat people got no reason to live. They got sharp claws, creepy eyes, always going around stalking girls who ain't your wife. They got little whiskers, big old teeth. Leave you some perfume before they corner you to eat. Well, I don't want no cat people. Don't want no cat people. Don't want no cat people around me. Meow, meow, meow.